Hello, everybody. This is Nick Totero, Professor of Information Technologies, Computer Science, Lakeland Community College. Let's talk enumeration. All right. Enumeration is basically the process of you have targeted a machine and now you are trying to gather as much information about that machine. The open ports, what operating system's on, you're going to be looking for versions, you're going to be looking for potential vulnerabilities. You may be running scripts against that machine. Now, as I mentioned in other videos, we have begun to cross a line. The line that we have crossed is that we are now invading that machine's privacy, right? We are triggering that machine to tell us information that generally is not accepted, and we can get into significant problems. Depending on the machine, depending on who it is, you may be prosecuted. So I'm going to keep warning people about that. That's why I use virtual machines or the NDG server and stuff like that, because I cannot do this stuff in the wild. So let's start from there. And in this video, this is going to be a video that I use the NDG server kind of off script. I fired up one of the labs, but I'm going to use this NDG server off script, which you as a student can do, right? So instead of building a test environment at home, if you wanted to, you can do that. But if you wanted to try just playing around with some stuff and you don't want to build all that stuff on your home, you can use the NDG server to do some of this stuff. So be aware. This particular video, we're going to be talking about NetBIOS, SMB, Microsoft enumeration. So we have to have a little bit of history behind that. So let me go up to my machine. All right. And the first thing we're going to talk about is NetBIOS. NetBIOS is I'm looking at the Wikipedia. It is something that if you're familiar with Microsoft and the Microsoft family of operating system, it is a protocol that allows easier communication between Microsoft machines. We have to go a little bit back in history. A lot of these protocols were developed in the 80s and the 90s when we were just building networks. You know, we were dealing with Macintosh, Apple's Apple Talk and Phone Talk, and we were dealing with Windows 3.1.1 or something like that. We were dealing with Windows NT. And Microsoft tried to create an environment that was fairly easy to connect networks together. They weren't even dreaming. We weren't even dreaming about the internet. It's not on this page, but there was other protocols out there. One of the protocols that Microsoft tried to use was something called NetBIOS. NetBIOS is a part of a protocol. It's in one of the layers of the OSI reference file. NetBIOS was a completely separate protocol. NetBIOS was extremely chatty, and all this stuff was designed around ease of connectivity. Again, they weren't thinking about the internet back then. So anyways, Microsoft jumped onto this NetBIOS bandwagon, which allowed machines to be named. We weren't using DNS servers. We were using things called Win servers. Standard TCP/IP does not have NetBIOS. When Microsoft became a dominant player in the industry, they began to write code, or people began to write code under what was called NetBIOS over TCP/IP. And what that allowed it to do, it still allowed Windows machines to talk to each other using TCP/IP. Now, the rest of the internet doesn't use NetBIOS, so Unix never used Unix never used NetBIOS, but Microsoft still does. Their Active Directory services, how they do file shares, how they can potentially discover themselves on the network are all related through NetBIOS. But the rest of the internet, Linux, Unix, doesn't use NetBIOS. The other thing that Microsoft used and developed is something called Server Message Block, SMB. And this is the protocol that is used for Microsoft to share, to make shares, to allow sharing of folders, sharing of printers, sharing of devices. Again, it's more of a Microsoft thing. I'm not quite sure if they developed it. They made some modifications. Now it's down here, Common Internet File System. They like to use the word internet, but it's not the internet. Linux and Unix do not use SMB. They use something called NFS, Network File Systems, Network File Servers. But Microsoft still uses SMB. So if I have two Microsoft computers, I can have them very seamlessly communicate with each other and share stuff with each other with SMB. If I have a different type of operating systems, then we have to take things into consideration. Now, when we have a heterogeneous network of different operating systems internally, we can install something called SAMBA. SAMBA gets installed on Linux and Unix machines, and what that does is it basically puts an SMB service onto a Linux machine. So SAMBA is a Linux package that will allow a Linux or Unix machine to almost emulate or pretend to be a Microsoft client or emulate or pretend to be a Microsoft server. So we take all those things in consideration when we're dealing with enumeration. Probably the biggest thing the two biggest things we take in enumeration on a Microsoft side is NetBIOS. So we oftentimes will go scanning for networks and looking for devices, and we're looking for a NetBIOS, and the SMB. Most of the time when we do those type of scans, we're going to hit Microsoft computers. But occasionally, if we have a Linux machine out there that's is running SAMBA, we may come across those, right? So I wanted to lay that out before we go any further. The other thing I want to lay out is that all this stuff does use certain TCP ports. Remember our discussion, or we probably had discussions about well-known ports. And if we look down here, sorry for the jumping around, we have this TCP port 445, right? That is the port that Microsoft uses for their Active Directory and their SAMBA connections. So if we were to see those particular ports, those are on a given machine that we scanned, those are probably indications that is either a good chance it's a Windows machine, or it's a SAMBA machine. For the rest of this discussion, I'm just going to say these are Windows machines. Then we have other type things that are really associated with Microsoft. We have port 464. That's the Kerberos. That is the security that Microsoft uses for logging in and connections and access tokens and stuff like that. So in this video, when we're dealing with enumeration or deep diving into target machines, we could identify very quickly those target machines as Microsoft or a SAMBA machine. Again, I'll keep saying Microsoft as a potential Microsoft machine, and then we deep dive into them. Now, some enumeration, we go even further where we begin to look for vulnerabilities and we take advantage of vulnerabilities. In this particular video, we don't want to do that, okay? We just want to kind of deep dive into looking for NetBIOS machines or SMB machines, right? So I'm going to go to my NetLab server. I'm going to use this. Again, you can do this on your own. And if you remember from previous videos or previous classes, we can scan and look for life, right? I'm not going to go through all the steps. Those are in other videos. But let's scan, and we can even do an aggressive scan. All right, if I say Nmap-ST and I give it a range of 192.168.0.0/24, we're suspending reality a little bit. I know what network to look for. Assume that I kind of found out what network I'm on. But just to expedite things, I'm going to run these scans. In a second, I'm going to stop running the scans. I've already run them, and I'll just go through the history, and we can talk about the history. Now, while that's running, I'm going to use a Linux tool that you may see inside textbooks. So that was done running, and that's called nbtscan. And what that is basically a NetBIOS scan of our network, right? So it's going to use other things to go out there and look for this NetBIOS environment. And we're going to compare the two. So we have similar, this one, the Nmap, I tend to prefer Nmap just because it gives us more verbose, or potentially more verbose, and later on we're going to look at scripts output. But there are simple tools that we can readily use, and nbtscan is one of them. So you see I'm basically using almost a similar syntax. I'm saying, okay, scan it in this given range. And it came back fairly quickly, and you'll notice things immediately. On the Nmap scan, what do we have? We have machine 20, 192.168.0.20. We have 192.168.30. We have 192.168.100, 254, and even 2. So we have a whole bunch that the Nmap discovered. Now, nbtscan is not broken. nbtscan is specifically designed to look for those NetBIOS connections. It tested all those machines. It went to the exact same machines that the Nmap did. It did everything, except it said, well, wait a second here. I'm querying that machine. I'm asking that machine, and it's not a NetBIOS machine. So I'm going to ignore it. I'm not going to report it back. So it did report back the machine that does have a NetBIOS flavor to it. And, it tried to do the 0.0 just means the entire network, and the 255 is a broadcast. It did find a Windows operating system. Now, you'll notice that it does say right here, it's the reading this is 192.168.0.20. It's a Win operating system. It's reporting it as a server. Now, let me explain something here. It is not reporting that it is a server 19, server 13, server 08. It's just saying that particular device provide some service on the network. Maybe it's a Windows XP machine. I don't know. Maybe it's a Windows XP machine that's sharing its printer. So nbtscan is saying, hey, we got some shares there. So it doesn't give a lot of information, but it does just give information back about our our NetBIOS machines. Now over here, if we do a comparison with the Nmap, remember when I did the scan, it went and both of them scanned the entire network, but Nmap reported on all the servers it found. nbtscan just reported on the NetBIOS servers it found. And lo and behold, we get a whole bunch of things here. Now, just through past experience and learning this, you begin to see things, right? The things just start to pop up. For example, I've already made mention of this, but the 445 port. If I go back to the TCP, 445 is the Microsoft Directory Services, the SMB connection. All right, so I'm pretty confident that this is probably a Microsoft server, right? It's not a SAMBA server. I'm pretty confident based upon the two additional pieces of information from the nbtscan and from the Nmap server. So I may want to begin to deep dive into that particular server. Again, this enumeration video is about enumerating Microsoft machines. Enumeration is basically deep diving, finding more information. And just by a cursory glance at the Nmap side, lo and behold, that's a strong indication that's a Microsoft server. We have something called a domain. We have Kerberos going on here. We have Kerberos password 5. We have global catalogs. These are all Microsoft buzz phrases, not buzz services. I taught Microsoft for years, so we talked about global catalog servers and Kerberos and things like that. So I'm pretty confident, based upon knowledge, that 192.168.0.20 is a Microsoft server. So let's enumerate it a little bit further. nbtscan, clean, it brought me. I'm going to begin to use, let me clear this up. It's in the book, and it's well beyond the scope of this course, but Nmap provides scripting, a scripting language, and it has predetermined scripts, hundreds and hundreds of these predetermined scripts. And now I'm on my Kali side. I'm over here on my Kali side, and I want to say, let's just start simple. Show me all the scripts involving SMB, all right? And again, I've already done it. And the line is basically locate everything that has an NSE. That just means the Nmap scripting environment. Grep out. So list everything that is, locate all NSE files, but then grep or only display files that would have SMB in their name. And if I run this, you see I have a whole series of scripts associated with Nmap looking and targeting SMBs. Now, this is going to end very boring. It's going to be a very boring ending. That particular server doesn't have a lot of vulnerabilities built into it, right? So I'm enumerating away. I can find additional information associated with the server, but it may not provide a vulnerability or anything like that. Now, in other videos, I will be attacking a well-known vulnerable computer. It doesn't happen to be a Microsoft computer. Now, one of the things that we want to think about, in another video, I talked about legacy machines. Some of those legacy machines have well-known vulnerabilities that people aren't patching and stuff like that. Not the case here. This is a pretty secure machine, but I can still gather information about it. And one of the things is I can run these given scripts. So let me clear this and let me run a script. And what this is saying is use Nmap, that's right here, Nmap, run a script and run the script SMB Enum share off this thing. And what this is going to try to do is it's going to go out to that, it's going to go out to that Windows machine, and it's going to see if there's any shares that potentially are points of weaknesses. It's not looking for vulnerabilities. It's just looking if there's any shares of interest. Again, this is going to be fairly boring. So let me run it and give it a little time. It's going to be a little boring. Let's really be honest about that, because it's a pretty secure machine. It brought back some information, but it really didn't bring back any known shares. If you look at textbooks or if you look at YouTube videos or something like that, and you were to run that particular script, they may come back with a lot of vulnerabilities based upon somebody may have created a very vulnerable machine, or maybe somebody pulled out a Windows 2003 server or even a Windows NT 4.0 server and they tried to run these. Obviously, we would get more. I believe this might be an 8 or something like that. I'm not 100% sure on that. But it's pretty thick. But it still brought out information, and you'll notice that it's basically the same information here. So it's a little bit boring. If it did have shares, it would kick back those shares. All right. The most important thing that comes out of this this particular video is not the actual mechanics of the enumeration. Yeah, there's an infinite number of things you can do when it comes to the mechanics of the enumeration. The important thing is that we can look very specifically at certain types of server, and based upon what they're running, what ports are open, if they're running NetBIOS, if they're running SMB, we can begin to start doing other types of enumeration. We can look for operating systems, we can look for vulnerabilities. Now, some of those scans do take some time, right? So it's, well, you'll see in another video, or if you watch some other videos of mine, some of these scans can take, and we're dealing with very simple machines, not a big network, could literally take 15, 20 minutes, and I compress that down. So enumeration, SMB, NetBIOS enumeration is just taking a deeper look into a Microsoft machine or potentially a Linux machine running Samba, right? That being said, let's go out and learn something.